The motion is agreed to.
Financial Markets Conduct Bill, third reading. Financial Markets Repeals and Amendments Bill, third reading.
I call on Government Order of the Day number 7.
Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 3, first reading.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Todd McLeay.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 3 be now read a first time, and I nominate the Finance and Expenditure Committee to consider the Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill number 3. This bill continues the government's focus on providing proper governance over this multi-million-dollar taxpayer-funded scheme by making borrowers aware of their personal obligations to repay their loans and the consequences they will face when they choose to ignore them. Mr Speaker, I should add at this point that the overwhelming majority of borrowers do the right thing and take their repayments seriously. However, there remains a small group of mainly overseas-based borrowers who consistently renege on their loan repayments. As at 30 June this year, this group was responsible for 80% of all overdue loan repayments. This lack of personal responsibility is clearly unfair to borrowers who do honour their repayment obligations. The main purpose in this bill is therefore targeted at the small group of overseas-based borrowers who, in spite of Inland Revenue's best efforts to encourage their compliance, continue to ignore their responsibilities despite having the ability to do so. The proposed changes, which were signalled by the government in the budget earlier this year, will give Inland Revenue greater powers to deal with this group of individuals. The proposals in this bill build on measures introduced last year, which allow for an information match between Inland Revenue and the New Zealand Customs Service to identify borrowers at the border who are in serious default on their loan repayments and forward their contact details to Inland Revenue for follow-up. This was the first step towards identifying individuals at the border who fail to respond to Inland Revenue's best efforts to encourage them to make repayments on their loans. The principal measure proposed in this bill strengthens this provision by allowing Inland Revenue to request an arrest warrant for borrowers with the most serious history of non-compliance who are attempting to leave the country after visiting New Zealand. Mr Speaker, I would like to stress at this point that this action would only be taken when dealing with the most serious cases of non-compliance. This means action would be taken only when all other efforts by Inland Revenue to persuade the borrower to make repayments have failed, and only for borrowers that can clearly afford to pay. It is, however, intended to send a clear message to all borrowers that a student loan carries the same responsibilities as a commercial loan, and that it must be repaid irrespective of where the borrower may choose to live. The other major proposals in the bill are also based on promoting personal responsibility for loan repayments and greater fairness across the student loan scheme. The principal proposal of these provisions is to bring overseas-based borrowers' repayment obligations more into line with their New Zealand-based counterparts. Under the current rules, an overseas-based borrower's repayment obligation is based on their loan balance. For New Zealand-based borrowers, however, their repayment levels are based on their level of income. The effect of this difference is that the repayment obligations for an overseas-based borrower decreases as the person's loan balance falls, whilst a New Zealand-based borrower's repayment increases as their personal income rises. In the interest of greater fairness, the bill proposes to fix repayment obligations for overseas-based borrowers based on their loan balance. Overseas borrowers with a loan balance over $45,000 will also have their repayments rates increased. The effect of these proposed changes will be to reduce the current repayment time and the amount of interest these borrowers will ultimately have to pay on their loans. This will result in a fairer, more efficient outcome for all concerned in the student loan scheme. The remaining measures proposed in the bill are largely remedial in nature, Mr Speaker. Their purpose is to ensure that the student loan scheme operates as intended and that it delivers value for money to the government, for the taxpayer and for borrowers. Mr Speaker, it's therefore with great pleasure that I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, I rise in the first reading